welcome back to the Witchy Web We Weave. I'm Alara.
Alex.
And we're continuing our Tarot Tuesday series. So today we're talking about the Hierophant, number 5. So the
Insert here.
Yeah, we're going to do what we normally do. We're going to put a little photo up so you can kind of look and, kind of soak in the different symbolism that I'm going to be talking about as we go along. I'm going to do what I normally do. Point out some of the symbolism, kind of what that might mean for the card, the major keywords, ideas that is associated with this particular card. We'll go through the pros, we'll go through the cons, and then maybe I'll give an example, So, the Hierophant. The Hierophant is a card that some tarot readers consider to be a little outdated, mostly because no one knows what the heck a Hierophant is anymore. So I'm going to start with the general definition. The definition of Hierophant is a person, especially a priest in ancient Greece, who interprets sacred mysteries or esoteric principles. So
it's kind of like a pope?
Basically. And actually in some of the oldest versions of tarot decks, including like Marseille decks and things like that, often the Hierophant card is the Pope card.
Yep.
So yes, you are actually right on the money. And there are actually different symbols within the Hierophant card that point more and more and more towards Pope. So, the key title or the key alternate title for the Hierophant is the Pope. This can be seen in the way that he's dressed, his garb. He is very clearly dressed in a manner similar to like a Catholic Pope or a vicar or a higher up member of the Catholic faith. He has a crown that is very, I would say it resembles very closely the Pope,
The papal hat.
Yes, the papal hat. That particular crown is considered, it's a 3 crown. It's got like 3 different layers or tiers to it. And that one it's supposed to be a symbol of the Vicar of Christ. So it's supposed to be the whole Prince of Princes, King of Kings idea. That's supposed to be kind of where the tiering comes in. The Hierophant it's got a lot of symbolism that is very closely associated with Christian symbolism or Christian mythology, I guess would be a good term for it. But I'm going to go a little bit more into that in a second. So when we're looking at the garb of the Pope is dressed, like I said, he's dressed very much like a Pope of the Catholic faith. He's dressed in red, the colors of red and white, the colors of authority, and what's supposed to be like spiritual knowledge or sometimes spiritual innocence. To kind of, those are your first couple of hints when you're first glancing at this character. But it's also the fact when you look at the Pope, he is sitting on a throne. He has authority. He has a hand, one hand that is pointing up to the heavens. Kind of symbolic. Remember the magician where he has one up and one down. It's kind of the as above, so below. Well, the Pope, he doesn't have the below. He's pointing upward to the heavens. He is connected divinely. He is receiving instruction, and he is kind of the leader or ruler, the enforcer of the idea of the divine law of things, of the way that things are supposed to be run. In his other hand, he is clutching a scepter, which has a very distinct symbol at the top. Think of it like a triple cross. So it's little line, middle line, bigger line, and the line going through it, which creates the rod of the scepter. So be still, Al. Sorry, Al's a little flippy floppy today. So that particular scepter is actually, the symbol itself it's known as was it papal? P-A-P-A-L?
I think so.
Papal or papal cross. So it actually is another symbol of the Pope, but it's also supposed to be, when you break down the symbolism within that particular headpiece, like the fixture on the top, it's supposed to state like or convey the idea of dominion over the creative, formative, and physical worlds. So he has all of these different things that he is supposed to be in charge of. Please don't spy on the neighbors right now. I have a very nosy dog, which you might not be able to see behind the photo that we have up here, but he was about to push his head between the curtains and spy on the neighbors. So, going back to some of the symbolism. When we're looking at the Pope, you'll notice at the foot of his throne. At the foot of his throne, he has 2 crossed keys. This is supposed to be, I've heard 2 different explanations for this symbolism, which I think it's a little bit of both, but I think one is probably more influenced than others. So one of the ideas for the symbolism of the cross keys is that one is silver and one is gold. It's supposed to be symbolic of the sun and the moon. That may be true. I can see it sort of. The other one is one that, considering the rest of the symbology that is so heavily Christian, I am inclined to believe the other one is probably the more prominent of the symbology of the 2 crossed keys, which is supposed to be a symbol of the keys held by St. Paul, which are supposed to be the keys to the heavens.
I was gonna say, isn't the flag for the where's the Vatican? Isn't their flag keys?
I don't know. I've actually never seen their flag, but if we can we like put a little?
Yeah,
photo
we'll throw
up?
a picture because I'm pretty sure. Because really quick story, but my teacher went to the Vatican and bought a flag.
Oh.
And he threw it up in his room because he was my history teacher, and no one knew where the flag was from. Because he had us guess like what flags he had hanging up, and we were all like,
I mean, I knew that the Vatican had a flag because it's considered its own little domain, but I've actually never seen the Vatican flag, which I find that to be very interesting, but I'm not really all that surprised. But yeah, the 2 crossed keys is often a symbol within Christian symbolism of the keys presented to St. Paul that is supposed to hold the keys to heaven. So
it's even got the crown on there.
Oh yeah, the triple crown, the gold and the silver keys.
Mm-hmm. And then I don't know if the rope means anything.
Probably.
But yeah, we will throw a picture.
I mean, I didn't take any, Christian mythology or I haven't taken any excessive classes on Christian mythology, but being raised Baptist, I'm a little keyed into some things, just not everything.
Yeah, especially not Catholic stuff. Especially
not Catholic stuff. I mean, Baptists, they like the apostles, but they're not saints. So we still get some of the stories, we get some of the lessons, we get some of the tales, but we just don't get the saint part. So I remember my grandmother talking about
the differences.
Yeah, some of the different apostles and things like that. Which I'm amazed at how much of my Baptist upbringing actually came in really handy for tarot. I was kind of surprised, but I kind of like it. But, so we have all of that. And on either side of the 2 crossed keys, you can see 2 pupils, one on each side kneeling before the Hierophant, sometimes with their heads bowed, sometimes looking up at the Hierophant. These 2 pupils are supposed to be indicative of the fact that not only does the Hierophant have authority, again, he's a very authoritative figure, but he is also, another title for the Hierophant is supposed to be the idea of the holy man or the great teacher. And honestly, the idea of the Hierophant as the great teacher is probably the idea that I most closely associate with the Hierophant. It's the one that I identify with the most, that I am the most comfortable with, that I can expand on the most, because honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you, when we're talking about the Hierophant is a very big shadow area for me because of my upbringing, because of what the Christian faith was to me when I was younger and through my formative years, and during my times of struggling with my sexuality and all of these different things. So for me, the Hierophant, like many other people, is a very tender spot. It's a very shadow-oriented part of the tarot. And it can bring up some very dark feelings. So for me, it is very hard for me to have a very good balance or an understanding of the good sides of the Hierophant in its more traditional setting. So, because a lot of the key symbols that you see within the Hierophant are all about tradition. It's the idea, he is the holder of tradition. He is the maintainer of tradition. Just the fact that he is called the Pope. Sits on a throne of authority. He is dressed in a very traditional garb of a spiritual advisor. You know, everything about him is very tradition oriented, from the symbolism, from his garb, from the fact that the two pupils kneeling before him as if he is the great teacher. These two pupils are monks. You can tell by normally by their haircut, because they have specifically like the bald spot shaved, like a very traditional, old school Christian monk. So the monks are there to show the aspect of the great teacher, but they're also there to show the idea of humility and bowing before tradition and bowing to the idea of religion and spiritual order. And all of those things can be very shadowy subjects for people, including myself. I'm trying to be as blunt with you guys as possible. This is a very shadowy card for me. That's why whenever I have created my own tarot decks, which I like to do as it's kind of a learning exercise for me. It's something that I do to try to help expand my understanding or expand my idea of the tarot and what the tarot can mean and what it can be. So often whenever I create my own tarot decks, often for me when I go and I'm developing the Hierophant or what I want to represent the Hierophant, to me, I either pick someone, which I'll talk about this in my examples, but I normally will pick someone that for me is a great teacher of the ideas of the order of the universe. So scientists or great thinkers, philosophers. Sorry, I just had a remembrance that I want to bring up later as I'm talking about this when I talk about the example, so I had to scribble it down before I forgot. Or if I'm creating my own image of the Hierophant for one of my own decks, I will pick a more nature-oriented advisor. I kind of think of the Hierophant as a great teacher or an advisor on the structure of how the world is supposed to be. But I take it into a very more nature and universe, like the order of the universe, the laws of the universe, the principles of science. I take it much more in that direction than I do in a religious, than an organized religion direction that is normal and typical of the Hierophant. Normally, the Hierophant is a very big example of tradition, and specifically, he is a concept of organized religion, which is normally not something that is more popular in pagan or New Age spiritualists. So yeah, one of the very last things that I want to specifically note before we actually move on to the positives, negatives, things like that, the last symbol that I want to point out is the Hierophant is sitting on a throne, and he's sitting on a throne right in between two columns. Sound familiar? Because that's kind of similar symbolism that we had to the High Priestess. Which in some ways I do consider the Hierophant to be another, like a flip side coin, a mirror, different but similar image to the High Priestess. But there is a slight distinction. With the High Priestess, the columns, one is black and one is white, and they're that way for a reason. With the Hierophant, both of the columns are white, and they're supposed to be symbolic of the idea of one column is law and one column is liberty. Something to think about. I thought it was very interesting when I found that out, because I thought it would be one column is law and one column is order, but that's not the case. One is law and one is liberty. So, think it over. If you have any thoughts about why that is, or if this, gets you thinking, let me know in comments. I would love to hear. So, moving on. Talking about, let's start with some of the upright interpretations of drawing the Hierophant. So, drawing the Hierophant upright sometimes can mean things like conformity. It can be an indication of the need for tradition or a subject involving your idea of what tradition is or how tradition plays a role in whatever subject you're reading for. It can indicate the ideas surrounding group religion or group spirituality. Or this card upright can mean the need for advice from someone that you look up to or admire, or someone who has greater knowledge or greater experience to you. The Hierophant can also be very closely associated upright with talking about or discussing subjects involving the reader's personal relationship to the divine in whatever capacity that is. So when we're looking at the obverse, the downside, the reverse of the Hierophant, sometimes this can be talking about concepts of toxic religion or non-conventional thinking when it comes to spirituality or religion or tradition. Breaking away or breaking the cycle of tradition. Whenever I was first deciding to walk my new path, I did get the reversed Hierophant pretty often, because I was challenging my entire idea of the greater world and how things fell within that. And I was actively shedding my old skin of how I viewed or how the world was supposed to operate. Which is why sometimes the downside or reversal of the Hierophant can indicate rejecting your family traditions or rejecting your family's religion or rejecting your the concepts taught to you in your upbringing for obvious reasons.
Sorry.
Shame on you. And I think a pretty common one for getting the reversal of the Hierophant is the concept of loss of faith. I think that kind of comes up every once in a while with the Hierophant in reverse. Is the concept of either outright questioning or having a very significant and deep loss of faith or a distrust of organized religion or organized faith, or turning away from something that was a foundation of your life, not always just spiritual, but just as a broader concept. Sometimes getting the reversal of the Hierophant is stepping away or dismantling old foundations of how you thought the world had to be or what the world was, and creating a new foundation for yourself.
So not necessarily a bad thing.
No, not always. It just sometimes a lot of people consider this to be a bad thing because it's such a shadow-based card for so many folks.
Yeah, I could see that, especially if you weren't expecting a reversed Hierophant or a negative Hierophant.
So this card doesn't have to be bad. Even in the reversal, it doesn't have to be bad. No card is
bad.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
How many times have I told you that?
I know. Tarot's more gray area. I know. But
Tarot,
this one feels more gray than other cards to me.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yes, and that's the big lesson with tarot, is there is no such thing as a bad card. Even the devil is not a bad card. It's not an evil card. Neither is death. All of these cards have positive aspects, but it's the idea of all of these cards, they are not good, they are not bad, they just are. Mm-hmm. And it is only our own interpretations, our own biases, our own thoughts that give them a good or bad connotation. For me, because I have so much shadow with this card, a lot of what comes up with the Hierophant for me is a negative outlook. But that is just because of me. And that's something that I can change with shadow work or exploring the card or developing how I relate to the card. Which is why in my examples, instead of choosing a more spiritually based Hierophant for myself when I'm creating my own decks, I choose to create Hierophants that are science or nature based, because that makes sense for me. That is less shadow for me. That is a way that I can incorporate the neutrality, the good and the bad. That I can reincorporate balance in my interpretation and my working with the Hierophant. So it allows me to have a much better relationship with the Hierophant, a healthier one. Although I still do like using the traditional Rider-Waite Hierophant when I do shadow work for this particular type of subject, because of God, it works. But when I'm giving examples of my version of Hierophant, because I think this is one of those cards where I think everyone kind of has to develop their own Hierophant, especially if there's a lot of shadow for you in this particular subject. But to give you an example of my Hierophants, so for me, I have two main ones that I love the idea of using for the Hierophant. One of them is a very modern figure of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is a great teacher in my mind. He is someone who has devoted his life to the study of the laws and the natural order of the universe, of stars and planets and constellations, of not just our world, but all of it. And not only that, but he has dedicated himself to being not only an enlightened individual, but trying to enlighten the world population on how we view the universe and how the universe really works. He is very deeply a great teacher because he is passionate about helping other people understand the world, because it will help them understand themselves. Because I think he had a quote where we are all ourselves a little universe made of stardust, something very similar to that idea. We hold the stars within us. All the elements that make up the universe make up us and our bodies. So for me, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a beautiful example of the Hierophant, and one that I greatly appreciate and respect. And then if we're going a little bit more old school, like ancient world old school, because I got to bring my little history into it. Hypatia. Hypatia is a figure that not a whole lot of people know about. Like I said, she's ancient world, but she was a ancient philosopher, and she was actually considered to be a great teacher. She is considered pretty widely among historians to be one of the, I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. She was one of the great female minds of the ancient world. And she studied under some of the great mathematicians, under some of the great philosophers and thinkers of that time. And she is closely connected to the Library of Alexandria and the fall of it, and trying to preserve that knowledge. And she was a teacher within the ancient world, and she would teach mathematics to men, younger students. She was basically a university professor in the ancient world. Think of her that way. But I can appreciate the idea of Hypatia, a woman working in a man's world, but being a great thinker, being a a learner from great teachers and then turning around and becoming a great teacher and trying to impart a love of science and mathematics on those younger than her, and standing by principles and trying to protect what she thought was sacred when the time came. So, just some things to think about. I try not to go too deeply into the actual history of Hypatia because I didn't want to bog y'all down with the specifics. I just wanted to give you a general, greater, like broad stroke idea of kind of what she kind of was to the ancient world. So yeah, this concludes our episode on the Hierophant. If you guys have any thoughts, comments, anything you would like to share in regards to the Hierophant, because it is such a, it has a lot of potential for really great discussions and conversations. So if y'all have anything to say about it, comment below, please. I would love to hear from y'all. I would love to create some conversation. So, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks. And until then, many blessings. Bye.